Welcome, everyone. It's our pleasure to have you with us today in this MBA talk. My name is Lida, and I manage recruitment and admissions for our executive MBA programs here at RSM. And thank you very much for joining us. I see already some familiar names and faces of both alumni of our programs, but also people that have been in touch with us at RSM in one way or another over time. And actually, if this is your first interaction with the school, even better, you picked the right event. The MBA Talk series is an initiative that we started last year. It's an opportunity to bring attention to topics that relate to key concepts explored by our students during our MBA programs. That includes the full-time MBA and the executive MBAs. These concepts relate to business concepts, as well as topics that relate to personal leadership competencies. And in order to do that, we tap into the knowledge and expertise of the vast array of professionals that are connected with RSM in one way or another. And that includes academic and professional staff members, alumni, and so on. So now to today's topic. I'm sure that you will agree with me that developing our skills on public speaking and presentation design is more relevant than ever. Making compelling presentations, as well as managing to keep the attention of your audience, is a skill that applies to both online and in-person interactions, and it can be taught. That's why we're very happy that Brandon accepted our invitation to share his knowledge on the matter today. Many of you know Brandon as the Director of Sales, Marketing, and Admissions at RSM, but how many of you were actually aware that he is a real entrepreneur? Starting in the basement of a home in sunny Charlotte in North Carolina, at one point in his career, Brandon built a successful advertising agency that serviced both American and international clients. Public speaking and his ability to connect with his clients is a meaningful way, is a skill that he has been developing throughout his career. And actually, over the past 20 years, Brandon has held a variety of roles across multiple sectors, including restaurants, advertising, and sports industries. Hopefully, he'll tell us more about that. He is a graduate of the One MBA program at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Kenneth Flagler Business School, and he is a frequent speaker and moderator at various events, seminars, conferences, and addressing topics on leadership, entrepreneurship, and marketing. So, Brandon, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lida. It's always when you build up things so well with the introduction, I'm like, oh, who is this guy? Is this? Oh, I better actually deliver, I suppose. So, hello, everyone. Nice to see you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon or this evening for a presentation on giving presentations. Of course, when you do that, you set yourself up to make sure that you give the best presentation possible because you're trying to show other people best practices and how to do it. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to cover a lot of different topics. So the first thing I'll do is I want to share my screen so we can bring the presentation itself onto everyone's screen. So we've got that there. Perfect. Okay. So what are we going to cover today? Great question. I've divided the presentation into 5 main areas. We have the introduction and some housekeeping things, preparing the presentation, which in my opinion is probably one of the most important things that we need to do is actually preparing it, followed by what to do during the presentation. I've added a new section, as we can all imagine, over the past year on online presentations and the challenges that you face in an online environment such as this, which is a little different sometimes than doing it just in person, and then finally bringing it together with key takeaways. Now, Lida did already give a great introduction, but just a little bit of color behind that. So again, Brandon Kirby is my name, and I have been in a lot of different industries. I started my career actually in the hospitality industry and the restaurant business. And that's really where I learned and honed the skills of public speaking and thinking on my feet and dealing with situations when they happen in the moment. I'm sure you've all been to a restaurant when maybe the food was sent out was wrong or you had an issue with the service. I became very accustomed to walking out to tables. We called it dead man walking, like when you're walking to the electric chair, because you never knew what you were going to get when you went to a table. So one of the most dreaded things you could hear as a restaurant manager was table 32 is asked to see a manager. So you never knew what you were going to get. So I became very good at interacting with people, dealing with situations on the fly, and then finally training that with the staff. After that, I spent a lot of my career in the advertising space, specifically with the branding agency, where I was doing a lot of business pitches. So I was in very large pitches with clients and learned how to deal with the pressure of that, again, thinking on my feet, but also at that time really worked on my skills of designing presentations. So I'm going to share some of those tips for you as well today. They can be applied not only in a business pitch, but even everyday presentations. I think that oftentimes, and when I actually created this presentation, it was really about what I call stand and deliver. So standing on a stage and presenting to people. But of course, not everyone finds themselves in that situation. So we can have presentations in a boardroom. We can have presentations in a breakout room. You might be standing, you might be sitting. So I wanted to create something over time that addressed all of the different situations that you might find yourselves in. So that's what we're going to do today. Just a few things for housekeeping, as I like to call it. We are recording this session, but don't worry, we cut out any of the comments or anything else, so you can remain completely anonymous. But we do record it for those individuals who registered with us and were unable to attend, so just know that. We are going to do some polls along the way because I do think having some interaction is very important when you're doing online presentations. So matter of fact, what I'm going to do is bring that poll up now while I finish off the housekeeping items. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll out into the world. So that should be popping up on your screen here in just a moment. I'll come back to the answers to that question in just a few minutes as well. The critical thing for me with any online presentation, and today is no different, is that it needs to be interactive. So please feel free to put comments in chat. If you have questions, I do invite you to use the Q&A box. It helps me and the moderation team to see what questions are coming in. But if you have a general comment, feel free to put it in the comment in the chat box. If you have a specific question, ask away at any point during the presentation. I want this to be interactive. I don't want to just be speaking at you for the next 40 to 50 minutes. So please feel free to ask questions in the question box, the Q&A box. I'll absolutely bring those into the conversation. So we've had the poll up here for about a minute, and about 81% of you have responded. And let me just bring the poll down and share the results here with almost 90% of the audience responding. As you can see here, we have people who have at least some experience with giving presentations, which is great. And this also helps me to know who's in the audience and what to emphasize or what to de-emphasize. So around 60% of you have a little bit of experience, with around 40% having more than the average person. And I'm a little scared. There are two of you who are almost a professional speaker. So I really have to make sure that I deliver some value for you as well. So hopefully you'll find at least one aha moment along the way. So thank you for sharing that. So without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? For me, presentation prep is more important than actually giving the presentation itself. So before we talk about the design, before we talk about actually giving the presentation, it's kind of like sports. We talk about with golf, 90% of it is mental. It's the same concept. You need to think about the presentation long before you actually start to create the presentation. And one of the important reasons to do so is when you actually sit down to start putting your thoughts down, being that you would have already been thinking about it, it becomes easier for you to put your thoughts in paper and to organize them and to get them the way that you want them to be. It's almost like you're thinking about a story over and over again. And the more you tell that story, the more comfortable it becomes and the easier it is for you to tell that story. So when you're doing your presentation, the critical thing is actually to think about what you want it to be. Who's going to be in the room? What are you trying to accomplish with the presentation? Are you trying to get a decision out of a group of people? Are you trying to inform them? Are you trying to inform them about good news, about bad news? Are you trying to inspire the audience? All of these things go into the thinking about what you need to do before you create the presentation. Once you do that, then you can start working on thinking about what the presentation itself is going to look like and what things you want to include or not include. So where do you start? The easiest way to do it is to start with what I call idea creation. So you want to sit down, you want to think about, again, the points you're trying to make to those in the audience. And you can only make a certain amount in any given presentation typically. Now this one is going to break that rule because I'm going to share a lot of different things because of course it's specifically about giving presentations. However, if I was giving a presentation towards a decision point, I would typically only try to bring the 3 or 4 most important supporting elements that I would want to share as opposed to trying to share everything. And again, you need to really sit down and think about who's in the room, because if you lose sight of that, your presentation very quickly can become irrelevant to those people. And the goal is to always make sure that you're giving the people in the audience what they want and what they can see. So idea creation is really critical. So how do you do that? Let me give you an example of how I did it for this presentation. When I originally gave this presentation, it was about doing it for some people on campus. We call it Share Your Knowledge. And it was an invitation for people who have expertise and experience in a particular area to share that experience and expertise with other people on campus. There's a lot of things I could have shared, but what I did was I sat down with the team that I work with and I said, hey, listen, if you were to go to a presentation about giving presentations and designing presentations, what elements, what items, what topics would you like to be covered? So I wrote it all down on a big flip chart. You see it here with my messy handwriting. This is how the presentation idea started. I took down all kinds of notes. It could be anything, right? A lot of stuff. It's a lot. How do I put that into an order? How do I create that into a presentation? For me, at least, and again, a lot of the things I'm sharing with you are what I do. I'm not saying that this is the golden standard. You have to do it this way. You need to do what feels best for you, but I'm going to share what works for me. What works for me from that really messy flip chart is to start putting things down into some sort of order. I start to group things together in a natural way. And then I start thinking, okay, well, there's some things here that are before the presentation. I see some things that are during the presentation. And then I called it random at the bottom, this stuff that doesn't really fit anywhere else, but I think is interesting. So for example, you'll even see here, things I'm going to be talking about, a reset point, how to handle difficult questions. All of that made the final cut. This is how I do it. I start wide and I start to narrow it. And you can do that with no matter the presentation. If you have to give a presentation on strategy, again, think about all the different things like a big canvas in front of you and only start selecting the things that matter and start to create a flow. We'll talk about that more here in just a moment. Of course, the eternal question that I do get asked a lot is to use PowerPoint or not to PowerPoint. It really is up to you, and it really depends on the situation in which you are going to be presenting. You'll notice with what I'm doing today, it's very visual, not a lot of words on screen. That's not always practical. You might have to give a technical presentation where you have a lot of things that you need to share. You might be trying to give an inspirational story because you're trying to motivate some donors to give money to your cause. Maybe having a PowerPoint, maybe not. So again, you need to think about who's going to be in the audience and the kind of information that they're going to want, because those are the things that are really going to drive what it is you're going to use. Really quickly, I'm not a huge fan of Prezi. I'm not really a huge fan of the movements and everything else. That was really popular a few years ago. I always try to keep it simple. I try to keep my animation simple. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. But the critical question to ask yourself is, do I really need a PowerPoint and why? Because you might not always need it. If it's new material, if it's something you're not familiar with, or you need the support of having it on screen, then absolutely use it. But I would recommend that you don't start creating your presentation in a PowerPoint. Personally, I'm a little old school. I always start with a pen and paper because I can cross stuff off. I can put Post-it notes and everything else. If you start working within the technology, if you will, you'll find yourself thinking like, oh, wait, is that the right font? Or, well, what if I wanted to do this and do that? And very quickly, you're not thinking about the presentation flow. You're thinking about the platform and the technology. So always, always, always try to get your thoughts down on paper first, because when you go to use a PowerPoint, a Prezi, a Keynote, whatever it might be, you already have the flow together and you're basically just assembling it. But if you try to create, ideate, and assemble at the same time, I guarantee it will take longer and probably the presentation will come out poor because of it. So what about the actual design? So I'm going to give you today 3 tips to a better PowerPoint. All right, here's the first one. And it's actually not about the PowerPoint itself, but I'm going to put it in this section anyway. And it's about telling a story. We know that people will remember stories far better than they will remember random facts and figures. So the important thing you need to do is tell a story. And I don't care what you're presenting, there's always a story. And a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you always want to build tension. If you're in sales, one of the things you were taught when you were working with a prospective client is to identify the pain point, to kind of move in on that pain point a little bit, and then show them what the world could look like if they choose your particular solution. Same thing. There's a story, there's some tension, and then there's a resolution at the end. That's what you should look for, a nice story arc. So imagine you're presenting figures and we need to increase sales in order to invest in that plant that we want to have to manufacture more products. Talk about what the world can look like if you don't actually have that plant built. Well, if we don't keep up with our clients, we run the risk of falling behind. And if we do so, we will have less revenue and we won't be able to invest as much. So I'm going to come here today and I'm going to show you 3 reasons why we should invest in this and how we can accomplish that. You set yourself up for the presentation. Now there's a story. And then when you get to the end, you can wrap it up. So tell a story, beginning, middle, and end. Doesn't matter the type of presentation you're giving. It's something you can use for each. Now, as far as the actual presentation itself, the biggest thing I can say is consistency. You need to keep it consistent. Your presentations should never take away from the message that you were trying to deliver. One of the easiest ways that can happen is by having an inconsistent presentation. And what do I mean by inconsistencies? Inconsistencies can be different fonts. Inconsistencies can be the logos. And I'll show you some examples here in just a moment. Another thing that often happens in presentations, and this is a challenge, especially if you're presenting in a language that is not your native tongue, or if it's a topic you're not very familiar with yet, is what we call verbal clutter. Verbal clutter would be anything along those lines. If you've ever been to a presentation and the person speaking does that a lot, over time, you will start listening to the verbal clutter more than what they're saying. I've been to some presentations where you end up counting how many times the person says it. So the key is to not give people any reason to not pay attention to what you're saying. That can be audio, so listening and what you're saying, but it can also be in the design of the presentation itself. So for example, I'm going to flip back and forth between a slide here and see if you can notice the difference. There's a couple of things going on, right? First thing is that something's going on with the font in the middle of the screen. I don't know what is that. So now I'm looking, I'm like, wait, did something change? What is going on there? If you notice in the bottom right-hand corner, the logo is jumping around. Now, I know this sounds silly as you're sitting here now, but I guarantee you, if you go to a keynote speech or you do a presentation and things like this are happening over time, your brain, especially when you're listening to a long presentation, your brain is looking for things to keep it active, to keep it interesting. Little things like this, someone will say, wait, did the logo just jump? And now they're not listening to what you're saying. I'm a huge stickler for this. And I always go through it. As a matter of fact, I found something today even. I was going through it and I noticed something that I had not caught before. Super minor. I noticed it. Hopefully no one else did. But you want to make sure that things are nice and consistent and well designed. Another one, if you're going to use images, such as I'm doing this way, you want to make sure that you carry them out to the full extent of the screen. I exaggerated this one at the bottom. You'll notice that in this slide, it's all the way to where it needs to be. Here, I've made it move up a little bit. And again, what that's going to cause is that the image is going to jump around on the screen. You want to make sure that everything is nice and consistent. So from your font selection, from the size to where you're putting your logos, things like that do make a difference. It's about showing that you're professional and that you have an understanding of the way things should be. The last thing for now that I want to talk about, because I want to get into the presentation part as well, is about the images and the layout set the tone. So for example, if you recall, the section that I'm in right now is called 3 Tips for Better PowerPoints or for Better Presentations. You'll notice behind it, what do I have? Asparagus tips. Okay, it's like a dad joke, I get it, but I always, for me, try to have images that relate to what I'm sharing on screen. You can also use them for visual cues, so it's a great way to remind yourself what you want to be speaking about, because then I could not even have to look and read what's going on. I could have this picture up and I know what section I'm in. But how do you come with good design and good layout, and how do you come with good photos? Imagine if I had started this presentation and I put this agenda up on the screen. Now remember, this is a presentation about giving presentations and design. And this is what I put up on screen. I would not have been surprised or upset if people decided to log off, go have a glass of wine if it's that time of day, or go back to work, whatever, because the images and the layout set the tone of the presentation. Remember, this is the first thing that most of the time the audience is going to see. You want to capture their attention. You want them to say, all right, this thing's pretty well put together. So I'm already on board with what this person is trying to say. The moment you start seeing these kind of things, then you start looking, oh, wow, that didn't look really good. Well, what else are they doing that's not, oh, the logo's bouncing around, or things like that really, really matter. You might not think so, but trust me, if you think to the presentations you've been in and you're like, wow, this is really terrible, there's a lot of words on here, all of that can be avoided. And remember, the moment you start thinking about those things, you're no longer listening to the speaker. So you want to make sure that you use things that align and look professional. So imagine here, same concept, right? Same information, more or less, but it just looks much better. It's much cleaner. And this doesn't take a lot of design work. This isn't something that we sent off to an agency. This is really just, and you can see all kinds of examples online too, and you can recreate them quite easily. This isn't going to be a PowerPoint course. I don't think that's what anyone wants to have, but these are the kind of things, the little things that really make a difference. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You say, well, look, that's great, but I don't have access to fantastic images such as what I see here on screen. If you recall, when I was talking about ideation earlier in the presentation, this image was in the background of that slide. If any of you were really eagle-eyed, you would have noticed what we call watermarks. You can see on screen here, it says 123 RF. I'll circle one here. So this is an image that is stock photography, but it's something that needs to be licensed. So in order for me to use it in a presentation such as this, or one where I would be charging someone to come listen to me speak, using this imagery without paying for it would be a huge no-no and can get you in a lot of trouble. It's not like the photographer is monitoring the web, but it has happened where presentations, especially if you're doing bigger presentations, you need to make sure you're using imagery and photography that's been cleared or is at least available for you to use. Now, when you're doing presentations, you don't want to be spending money necessarily. If it's an internal presentation, I understand you don't want to spend even $1, euro, whatever on photography. I understand that. But it is important to make sure that you do have good photography. So I'm going to share with you really quickly here, great photos in 3 easy steps. So here we go. If you learn nothing else tonight, this is probably the one thing that might help. I see some questions coming in, and when I get to this section, I will definitely bring in those questions. So hang tight. It's easy to do photos when you have a very tangible concept. So asparagus tips or some of the other things I was using in the background. So for example, I talked about preparation of the actual presentation. So what can illustrate that? Oh, food prep, something cutting. Okay, great. That's a pretty, you have to think about it, but it's tangible. What about topics that aren't tangible? Let's look at resilience, right? Resilience is the ability to cope with the crisis, to roll with the punches. Happens a lot that we talk about it in business and leadership. We talk a lot about resilience in our MBA programs. So how do we illustrate that? All right, well, here's how I would do it. And here is how I do it. I type in the word resilience. All right, perfect. I hit enter and all the results come up. I jump over to images. And what you'll see here on screen is all kinds of images that the web says should be tagged or related to resilience. I don't really see anything in here that I like. Okay, maybe the flower growing in the dried ground. Yeah, but most likely if it's coming up in the first row, it gets used everywhere. I'd like to try to have things that are a little different, but I'm still not seeing what I want. 2 other things you need to consider here. The first thing is you want to make sure that you have selected large, which if you see in the left-hand corner there, I've selected large images because you want to make sure if you're going to use them on the full screen that they scale out, okay? So you always want to select large. And the second thing you want to do is underneath usage rights, right here in the middle, you want to select Creative Commons. And Creative Commons means this is a public copyright, which means you can use these images for presentations, things like that, as long as you're not monetizing off of it, to use in your presentations. Now, by doing so, typically you're going to start seeing images disappear because they're tagged as being stock photography that you need to pay for. Pretty much if you take something from this section, from after doing this, this filter, you're going to find images that you can use no problem. But even now, after I've done that, I'm looking at what I have here on screen. There's nothing that really inspires me. And again, I don't care what presentation you're doing, you should always work towards inspiring the people that you're speaking to. And that's great. There's a comment coming in from Derek about pixels, and I am so glad you brought that up. So Pexels is a great website for free photography. I love it. I use it for my own creative stuff on the side. And it is absolutely, yeah, Unsplash is another one. And what's interesting, and I even did this today, Derek, to your point, because when I originally created this, I don't even think Pexels was really a thing yet. It's been around for a little while, but it wasn't as popular as it is now. So I tried today. I'm like, let me see if I can use Pexels. Let's see what happens there. So I went to Pexels, did this today, typed in the word resilience, and this is what came up. Now for me, these are still images that I can't work with. They're not bad. But for like a really abstract concept like resilience, I was like, I don't know about this. I don't know what's going on with that finger over there. Why is that tagged as resilience? So I'm like, still not necessarily for me. I'm not saying don't use Pexels. Definitely try it out, but don't be disappointed if you don't find what you're looking for. You absolutely might, but you might not always. And so Derek, great point on Pexels and Unsplash. Check them out. Great place for photography. But what do you do if you still can't find what you're looking for? Because for me, images are really impactful. So what can we do there? I go to some place like iStock Photos, which is where you would normally purchase photography. So some of the images, like the typewriter image, I actually purchased that because I used that in like all of my presentations. So the $20 it cost me, totally worth it because I use it everywhere. I type in the word resilience here, and I start to see some other images, and I'm like, these are pretty interesting. I don't know about the kid in the middle. The one with the kid in the car, I've seen that used everywhere. The ant is interesting, but I kind of like the one of the woman on the left crawling through the mud. Love that. So what I did is after that, I type in resilience into an iStock Photos type of site, get the pictures that are up there, and now I go back to Google and I type in crawling through mud. And then I get a lot of images. I do the same thing, Creative Commons, label for non-commercial reuse, and I find an image that I like. Now, I like the image of the woman, but I couldn't find one. But I did find one here of a guy crawling through mud. And what's really interesting, and again, this just happened today, so I'm really glad this worked out for Derek mentioning it. If you look here, I'm going to zoom in, and it says 2 men crawling on mud, free stock photo. If you look at the source of this photo right in the middle of your screen, it's coming from Pexels. It was actually on the Pexels website, but it wasn't tagged as resilience. So it didn't show up. So that's another reason or another way you can use Google to help you find images to really make those free stock image websites work for you. So again, love it. So I took that photo, brought it in, high res, nice and crisp, lots of action, lots of emotion, very emotive, and it can help you to inspire. So when you're looking for challenging topics and terms such as resilience, this is a great way and an easy way, not easy, but a great way to bring in photos that maybe you can't find even when you check those particular sites. So Derek, thank you for that. Made my job even easier to make that point, but definitely check them out. Pexels.com, unsplash.com, 2 great places. There are tons of them out there. They're not always tagged very well because, of course, these images work off of a tagging system. And if you think this is resilience, but the photographer thinks it's pain, it might not show up together. So just something to think about. Real quick here, I have some questions. One was about how to get rid of verbal clutters. Yeah, this is a tough one. First thing to do is to practice your presentation. It's very challenging when you're first starting with a presentation because it's like when you meet someone for the first time, it's a little awkward. Oh, who should talk? What should I say? But if you have an old friend, you're like, hey, how's it going? And you just feel comfortable with it. And this is why also preparing a lot for the presentation before you create it also helps because you're not trying to remember what you're saying. Oh, wait, well, did I miss that? What was it? Oh, what did I want? Ugh. That's one thing. Practice it. Practice it in front of your friends, practice it in front of your family. Those are the things that I would do or that I have done. Over time, as you become more comfortable with it, it's like second nature, especially if you are presenting in a language that is not your native tongue. If I had to do this in Spanish, it would be a completely or Dutch for that matter, it would be a totally different presentation with probably lots of gestures and me going, So I think things like that really help. Another way you can do it is just practice telling stories. Practice telling when you go home at night and you're speaking with your partner, your spouse, whomever. Tell them about your day, and try to get away from using the clutter. Have them point out, how did I do? Yeah, you did better. Things like that. Just getting used to speaking and sharing stories and knowledge and things like that can really help. So practice, do some mental preparation ahead of time, and speak to people that you know and tell them stories or talk to them about your day. Because what you're doing is you're creating those moments quickly in your head. What did I do today? Oh, well, I got up, took my daughter to school, but I'm trying not to say because my brain is just far enough ahead from my mouth. Over time, you'll get much better at speaking while you're thinking, so that way you don't have to come up with. It takes practice. I mean, that's the bottom line. It takes practice. And we all have good days and bad days. Sometimes when I listen back, even to presentations that I've done like this, I'm like, wow, sometimes I really did say and I shouldn't be. It happens. So the first thing is, like anything, acknowledging that maybe you say it a lot. Here's a question here from anonymous attendee who's saying, could you please share with us which tools are available to place questions during PowerPoints, as I just did? Do you mean the polls? I want, if the person, anonymous attendee, if you can clarify just to make sure I understand your question. You can put it in chat. You don't have to put it in the question box. I want to make sure I get that one, so I'll come back. Anthony's asking about the importance of tone of voice, pauses, and speed. Yes, and let's keep moving because we're going to start getting into that right now. You guys are making my job so much easier today. We talked about preparation for the presentation. Now we're going to talk about mental preparation before you actually give the presentation itself. This is really critical as well. While we're waiting for that, I'm going to put up our second poll of the evening, and that is going to be whether or not you get nervous before you give a presentation. So let's launch the poll here real fast. 3 choices here. Always, I get butterflies even thinking about presentations. Sometimes, only for large groups or important topics, or never, I'm a robot with nerves of steel. And if so, I'd like to meet you. We'll let that run for just a moment so that the group can respond. For me, mental preparation is just like sports. And there's been a lot of studies shown, especially in tennis, for example, that reset moment in between sets allows the top level athletes to really perform. So it's that the resetting, the mental preparation for the next set, envisioning, hitting the ball. I don't even play tennis, but those are the things I think that really help. It's the same thing for presentations. Before I do a presentation, especially if it's a new one, I can sometimes feel, I don't know if nervous is the word, but you just get this energy that's flowing through you. So for me, I try to find a way to channel that. And the way that I channel that, and this is going to be really funny, and for anyone in the audience who knows me, this won't come as a surprise, but I love metal. I love heavy music. I love all kinds of music, but I love metal. You know, Slipknot, Metallica, whatever. And sometimes before a presentation, or I did the emceeing for the graduation ceremony for our MBA students, and I'll put my headphones on, I will go find a quiet spot, and I will crank it up. And for whatever reason, it just helps me to block out the world, to review my notes, just to get in the zone. The mental preparation, and again, this doesn't have to be going on stage for a lot of people. If you're going into a boardroom for a very important pitch or an important presentation you need to give, or if you're about to deliver bad news, doing these things can help you get in the zone and channel. So let's see real quick before we jump on to the next slide. I'm going to end the poll. We're going to share the results, and it looks like it's about 50-50. With, again, the same 2 people probably who said they were almost professional speakers are probably the robots here. Kudos to you. But about 50%, 50-50 pretty much of the audience is saying, you know what, I always get a little nervous or very nervous before presentations. And then the other half saying, you know what, I'm okay sometimes, but there are moments where even I get a little nervous, especially if it's in front of large people or if it's an important topic where I don't want to mess it up. I want to share something with you that I feel is one of the most powerful points in this presentation, and we'll do that now. The one thing that's really critical to know is that no one knows what you're going to say in your presentation, except for you. Let me illustrate it this way. Think about it. Usually if this was an audience full of people, I would ask to raise your hands, and I could do it virtually, but just for the sake of time, I won't. But how many of you have been to a play or a performance where someone has messed up? And I don't mean like at a secondary school or like the local church group. I mean like, you know, Broadway, professional, Royal Shakespeare Company, West End, and, you know, East End, whatever in London, right? How many of you have been to a presentation or where someone has messed up? I can tell you that most of you probably have, but you just don't know it. Why not? One, of course, the actors are professionals. They know how to roll with the punches. Sure, that's probably part of it. But the second thing is you don't have those things memorized. If you went to go see Richard III from Shakespeare and they messed up scene 4, act 2, lines 57 and 58, you would have no idea. Granted, if you went to Hamlet and they messed up to be or not to be, that's a different story, but that's because you know it. Remember, no one knows what you're going to present except for you. If you forget something, this happens so much. Oh, I meant to say this before. Don't say that. Why? If you forget something, bring it back in. Oh, earlier we were talking about the importance of three things for killer photos in PowerPoint presentations. As I look at this picture here, that reminds me of another thing that I think that you should be aware of about that. That's a great way to bring that in without saying, you know what, I'm an idiot. I forgot something. I was nervous. Never admit that you forgot something. At least that's my policy, at least in your presentation. Now, if someone asks you a question, you can say, oh, you know what, great point. I meant to mention that earlier, but that's in a question scenario. Don't stop. Don't catch yourself and say, oh, let me go. Just keep going. Pick it back up later. I think for me, that's really, really critical that no one knows what you're going to present. Everyone typically wants to see you succeed, especially if it's a presentation. No one likes to see awkwardness. No one likes to I hate watching those shows where people get in situations where they're being made awkward and things like that. Don't like it. So remember, no one knows what you're going to say except for you. And I think that's a really powerful thing. I've heard in the past, oh, imagine everyone's naked and blah. No, that for me doesn't work, especially if it's like your boss, because quite frankly, this gets really awkward. So no one knows what you're going to say except for you. And that's a really powerful thing to remember as you're going into presentations. Really quick checklist. I just want to briefly touch upon this. Always, always, always make sure that you have the right AV equipment that you need. Your clicker, make sure you have the dongle if you're on a Mac, HDMI, VGA connectors, especially if you're doing pitches and you're going into other environments that you do not know what equipment they have. Always, always, always have those things on hand. One, you look like a true professional if you have them and they don't. I've been in situations where I've flown halfway around the world. I had to give a presentation at very large companies. I walk in, the room is far from optimal and they don't have some of the things you need. It is always great to have it because that's another thing that can really mess you up. If you're comfortable giving a presentation, imagine I had to give this presentation without slides or I had to give it on my laptop screen. I've had it happen. I've learned. So learn from me. Get the equipment that you need. Keep it in your bag. Always take it with you. Cool. Just checking here on comments and questions. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So some things to think about as you go into the room. The first thing is you always want to know your audience. And again, this can be whether you're a public speaker being invited to give a keynote speech. This can also be going into the room with the board, with colleagues or superiors from within your own team, with clients. You always want to know your audience. And not just where they work and where they went to school. Yes, of course. But it's also good to know, are they forced to be there? I've given presentations before where the people in the room, it was part of a training, they had to be there. Some people were cool with it. Some people were clearly not into it. It helps give you a little bit of an edge of what in the style you can present and what kind of audience are you going into. Is it a hostile audience? Is it a positive audience? Maybe before you walked in the room, they just got an email that said, hey, we're cutting 20% of the staff. You're not necessarily going to know that, but knowing your audience is really critical. So that's why I think doing that research ahead of time, if you can, knowing who's going to be in the room is really critical to give a killer presentation. If you can, try to network before. So by that, I mean, if you are giving a presentation or pitching with at a client, for example, you're going, and again, this is a pre-COVID world. Now it's a little more challenging, but of course, before COVID came around, if you're going to get a cup of coffee or maybe there's a breakfast snack bar and you're getting something or what have you, just trying to network with people. This will come back in just a moment. Trying to find some friendly faces in the audience because that can come in really handy when you actually start to present. All else fails, ask the host. And again, oftentimes when you're presenting, there is always a host. The host can be your client, Your host can be the PA who maybe set up that meeting for the board. So for example, if I have to go present to the board at RSM, I usually only get a 15-minute slot. I tend to try to find out what else is on the agenda that day. Now, of course, they're not always going to share specifically, but I'll say, are there any heavy topics? Is it a light day? What's going on in there? Because again, you might get sandwiched between two really difficult decisions they're going to have to take. And you might see that, hey, you know what? They're really not really paying attention to what I'm saying. Is it me? Is it what I'm saying? It could just be that they just had a very serious decision to take, or they're stressing about a serious decision they're going to have to take after you. So no matter where you're going, no matter where you're presenting, there's always going to be a host. Try to find out what you can ahead of time. So all of this points towards knowing your audience. Let me pause for just a second and bring in some questions here. So here's a question saying, is it a good way to have hand gestures during the presentation to make us relaxed and less nervous? So and this is from Dia. So I don't know if you're asking, is it good to use hand gestures if you're nervous? Yes, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think we call it channeling your energy. So as long as you're not flapping around like a bird and you're using your hands for points of emphasis, then yes, I think that that is definitely something that is good there. So we've got that. All right, let's keep going. So during the presentation, so that's the sort of what the last and sort of the home stretch of this part is going to be on what to do during the presentation. So I'm going to give you some general thoughts, some quick hits, some quick wins, I think. The first one is going to be what I was just talking about, which is channeling your energy. If you get butterflies before a presentation, if you get that anxious feeling in the pit of your stomach, it's not uncommon for that to affect how fast you speak, whether you are speaking too quickly, are you monotone? So what you need to do is find a way to channel that energy. Now for me, I mentioned it was listening to music. I did this presentation once before, and someone in the audience said that they would go into the bathroom and shake their hands and get their energy out. You want to try to get that out because you want to hit the stage, and the stage again could be a stage or walking into a room to present, with a nice even balance of energy. Because if you don't, you run into the challenge of coming in, I call it too hot. Have you ever been to a presentation where the keynote speaker or the person presenting comes out and all of a sudden they start doing something like this? Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for the presentation on giving presentations. My name is Brandon Kirby. I am so excited to be here. I can't wait to tell you all these wonderful things. If it's early in the morning, you're like, dude, chill out. I haven't had my coffee yet. People, they get kind of blown back in their seat. You need to ease into it. And so what I think is one of the best ways to do that is you have to warm them up to who you are, to your voice, to the way you speak, to the way you use inflection. I don't care if it's a 20-minute presentation or an hour-long presentation. There is always time to do this. So what you need to do is tell an anecdote. That's a common one you see with speakers. Even if if I'm presenting to a team, I might say, hey, you know what? We finally bought a car this weekend. Isn't that crazy? We've been using public transportation for 5 years. Anything just to sort of start building a little bit of familiarity. Plus, it gives you the opportunity to get all of that nervous energy out before you start doing your presentation. So ease into it. It gives the audience a chance to get used to you and your presentation style. It allows you to build a little rapport. Great way to do things. Now, there was a question before, and I think this came in from Anthony, who was asking about the importance of tone of voice, speed during a presentation. Absolutely great point. If you don't channel your energy, you do run the risk of being too quick, of pushing your words together. I present a lot to international audiences where English is a second language. So I always have to remind myself, and even I fall to this sometimes, of slowing down. Not only slowing down, but being very good with diction. And diction and enunciation is how you pronounce a word, how clear you are with that, making sure that you pronounce each syllable properly. And keys for this is to force yourself to speak as slowly as possible. I challenge you at some point in the next week to record yourself on your phone speaking about your day or reading something for that. No, don't read, speak. Speak about your day. And I want you to speak as slowly as you possibly can where it doesn't feel awkward. See how fast that sounds. I guarantee you it's faster than you think. So Anthony, to your question, one of the ways that I worked on it was I would record myself just talking when I thought I was speaking slowly. So I deliberately spoke slow. And even then I was like, wow, I really speak fast. That's one thing. The other thing is using speed to move into to make a point, at the same time using tonality, intonation of your voice. No one likes a robot. No one wants to hear, thank you so much for, no one wants to hear that. So I think if you work on that and you know in your head, because you've thought about your presentation, the points you're trying to make, I always try to end a section with using, kind of coming to that, to say the importance of using pace and diction. So I sped up a little bit. And then I go. It's about practice. It's about thinking. So for me, speaking and then listening back was a great way to really see how fast I was speaking. One other thing that I think is really critical here is another thing that Anthony raises, which is pauses. Use pauses as explanation points to the key items you are trying to deliver. Because when you pause, like I just did, it draws the audience's attention. We've all been in presentations, whether we're giving them or not, where people are on their phones and things like that. Pausing forces people to look up because they're like, what happened? Did the microphone cut out? Did they fall asleep? Did they get hit in the head? Barack Obama was great at this, at using pauses to effect. And I'm not going to do a Barack Obama impression. However, using pauses is probably one of the best ways to underline a point. I don't care how silly it is. If I told you that the only way to get rid of global warming was to have less cows because they would make less methane gas, but I said it something like this, it's really important that we focus on global warming and climate change. And clearly it is something that all of us face. And the only way that we can truly have an impact on global warming is to make sure we have less cows. I mean, that's silly, but the point is use pauses effectively. That's another thing too. Practice that, record yourself, listen to it. I know it sounds silly, but it's definitely something that helps. Let's have some questions here about audience expectations. Great. We're going to get into that here in the home stretch. We have about 10, 15 minutes left. Any advice for avoiding to speak fast? Hopefully I just gave you that. So I think we should be good there. Last point on this section is what I call a reset spot and stage awareness. If you are speaking and you're standing, we have a tendency to gravitate towards one area of the room or the stage versus the other. I like to wander a lot when I speak. I can do podium style presentations, but I prefer to move. It's just how I am as a person. What I try to do is when I get to the end of a section, I bring myself back to center stage or center of the room so that everyone feels that I'm giving them the same amount of attention. So I think that remembering where you are is critical. Now, if you are on stage, you want to make sure that you're giving everyone equal opportunity to listen and have access to you. So if you're all the way over on stage right, the people on stage left feel kind of abandoned. So you need to make sure you go over there. I do also tend to walk through the audience sometimes if it makes sense. When I'm doing open days here at school, I'll get into the audience, kind of like a talk show host when they're asking questions at our alumni panels. Totally acceptable as well. One other thing about moving around, if you've ever been in a presentation where people are speaking while you're speaking, you don't want to stop and say, hey, can you guys, that's kind of rude. Please don't do that. Maybe not the best way. I like to walk and stand near people who are talking while I'm speaking. I don't say anything to them. I don't look at them. I just naturally wander over. And it gives them the idea like, oh, he's near me. I should probably stop speaking and re-engage. That's a great way to bring people back in. I want to talk about establishing credibility and doing it quickly. You don't have to be a best-selling author, but if you're about to stand and deliver and give some ideas, you need to establish credibility. For example, if you're coming in with a new technical development that you want to share with senior management to get their buy-in for an investment, probably makes sense if you say, look, I'm the lead engineer for this particular project. If they don't know you, and there might be people in the room who don't know you, remember that. You might be presenting to people who are within your company, but don't really know you or your expertise. No matter the situation, establishing credibility and why they should listen to you is really important. Remember at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about the restaurant business and business pitches and advertising to try to basically say, look, I've been around the block. I have a few things I think I can share with you. You should listen to me. Establish credibility. Reading a room. This is going into audience expectations that Wayne was asking here in the Q&A. And everyone wants to be engaged. Everyone wants to be listening. And when you're presenting, things are great in the beginning. Everyone's, hey, they're listening, great, but about now, 40 minutes in, it can be hard to keep people engaged. How can you do that? You need to read the room. I was recently doing a MC for graduation for our master's students, and I had about 1,000 people in the room, and we were waiting for the students to come in. The students had to wander throughout Rotterdam with a camera crew, and they wander past different, monuments. Oh, there's the Markthal if you're from Rotterdam. Oh, great, there's Euromast. And I was told that there was going to be a live feed, and then I didn't have to do anything. But of course, like most technology, the live feed broke. So after about 5 minutes, I have 1,000 people staring at me with a frozen screen, and I'm on stage with hiding behind this little podium. So I thought, hey, no problem. I'm going to go out in the audience, got the microphone. Let's do some Q&A. Hey, I went over to the first section. Hey, people, you're here for one of your loved ones. Why are you here? Who are you here for? Why are you proud of them? What are they graduating from? Tell us that. Who wants to share? No one. Not a single soul raised their hand. All right. Take 2. Went to the second section. Same thing. Hey, who wants to talk? Nobody. I was misreading the room. Thinking back, look, they were only there for the 30 seconds their loved one walked across the stage. Other than that, they didn't care about anyone else. Okay, that's a little, maybe I'm really boiling it down too much, but I misread the room. So I think it's critical to read the room. If people are not feeling what you're putting out there, keep moving. If you're trying to hit a point and you're like, oh, this is in your head, you're like, oh, this is really important, and for some reason they're just not buying it, don't keep beating that dead horse, so to speak. Keep moving. And that's about reading a room. You need to make sure that you're looking for that. And those cues can be visual, nonverbal. If you're not sure how it's going, you can say, hey, is everyone still with me? Does this make sense? Do you have any questions? And again, it brings people back if they're, not paying attention to you. Those are some things you can do. Same thing for audience engagement. Remember how before I said you should be networking before you go into the room? One of the reasons why is you want to try to find some friends in the room, because it's nice to have a few friendly faces. And again, this can be a keynote speech, or this can be something where you're presenting to a board or colleagues. Having a few friendly faces when you make your corny jokes or you're landing some things, it's nice to have a few people who are kind of pulling for you to win. So I think it's really important to be able to do that. Keep in mind that different cultures have different approaches to engagement. I've been in some presentations where it was perfectly acceptable for people to be on their phones, either taking notes or not, listening, but also scrolling through Instagram or Facebook. Totally acceptable in these environments. You also have to be aware of the cultural dimension to where you're presenting and not take it personal. If you come from a culture where people are very much locked in, paying attention to you, and you go somewhere else where it's a little different, don't worry. But knowing those things, I think, can be helpful. Polls are great. Asking people to raise their hands, either live or on camera, is great. As a matter of fact, home stretch here, we're going to talk about online presentations. This is a section I added over the past year. And in the past, it's been more than a year now, but in the past, say, 15, 18 months, especially, even before Corona, we were doing a lot more online webinars. I've been doing moderations with faculty. I've been in studio online, a lot of different things. So here are some tips that I pulled together just to help you out. First things first, if you don't know much about how to give and be engaging online, the first place I would recommend that you go is Twitch. Go to Twitch. If you don't know what Twitch is, it's an iPhone app or an Android app. Basically, it's predominantly for gamers and musicians to stream, and you can see different things. I love Twitch. I'm on it pretty much every day just to watch different things, different musicians, different gamers. Yes, it's lame, but I still play video games. What I like about it, though, is the way they interact with their chat rooms. They'll have sometimes 50,000 people in the chat room. And yes, they'll have a moderator, but see how they're interacting with people. See how they're bringing things into the conversation. When you're bringing in things from the chat, you're bringing in questions from the audience. Go to Twitch. Great way to get an idea of what to do and how to do it. Practice is more critical here than anything else I can recommend when doing online presentations. Have you been to an online presentation lately where they didn't know how to share their screen? They were on mute because their microphone wasn't the one selected. It was selecting one that wasn't there. Practice, practice, practice. Even today, before we started, Lida and I were practicing something because I wanted to remember if what could be seen on my screen, for example, when I was in presentation mode. I couldn't remember if the chat window, if I slid it up, which I'll do now, I couldn't remember. So the chat window is on my primary screen here. I'm like, oh, does that show up on screen or not? I don't remember. Practice, especially if it's a platform you've never used. Okay, we've all used Zoom, we've used Teams, but there are a lot of other ones out there that you might have to use. Try things out beforehand. You want to know it forwards and backwards. Also, always, always, always use a waiting room. If you don't, you run the risk of some bad things happening. I have a colleague at another institution where they were running a webinar around a particular topic, a very sensitive topic, didn't have a waiting room or didn't have a registration. And guess what? Someone came in and started playing some pretty nasty things, and they were able to take over the webinar so much they had to shut it down. So always use a waiting room if you're doing webinars, if you're doing presentations for external people, even internal, always use a waiting room. Hopefully by now this is pretty industry standard, but I always want to remind you of that. I call it phone a friend because if you present online, it's always great to have a technical partner behind the scenes to manage things if things aren't going well. So launching polls, making sure questions are being brought in through chat and everything else. I've gotten to the point where I can sort of do it as a one-man show, but it's taken a lot of practice and it's a lot of multitasking, and not everyone's up for that. Some people have the skills and that's a strength. Some people don't. So always have a friend that can help you with that. They can admit people who might show up late into a room. They can monitor the chat. They can answer any smaller questions that you don't want to bring into the live chat, but you still want to resolve. One thing, always, always, always have an alternative way to communicate. You never want to chat within the chat room, even in private. I've been in situations where people thought they were sending a private comment. Oh, that person's talking forever, but guess what? It went to the public, and that was a problem. So we always keep it on the side, either just through WhatsApp or through Teams or whatever, so that way if there's an issue that I'm not seeing, they can tell me what's going on. They can monitor the chat. Always have someone as your co-pilot, if you will, and always have an outside way of communicating, not just within the platform that you're using. Huge, huge, huge thing. Please, please, please make sure you do that. Okay. Audience engagement part 2. This is another challenging one, especially online. If you've noticed, I've tried to use your names every single time I brought in a comment into chat. So if it was Derek, if it was anonymous attendee, if it was Wayne, didn't matter who it was, I was always trying to make sure to use the name. One, because people will look up if you say their name. I think that's the first thing. And using polls, using raise your hands, things like that is pretty much the industry standard now. I think really you have to have that much more energy when you present online than when you do in person, because you can only see part of me. I can tell you after I do a presentation online, I am totally done versus doing it in person. It just takes more energy. You have to be more expressive. You have to do more with your voice. These are the things that really make a difference. So, and again, if you're not sure, ask people, hey, everybody, does that make sense? Raise your hands in the little raise hand section if you're using Zoom. Things like that can really help. There's a lot of stuff online. I'm not here to reinvent the wheel for you, but for me, those are some things that I would think about. Last point before I wrap it up. Difficult questions. I put this in the online section, but this also works and is also relevant in the physical space. And I think as a business person, this really matters. If you are giving a presentation, again, asking for a decision point, or if you are on stage and someone asks you a really challenging question, how do you handle that? It can be really challenging. Couple of things to think about. First thing, ask them to rephrase the question. You see this a lot. Oh, actually, that's a really great point. If I'm understanding you correctly, are you saying this? Most people, when they rephrase the question, will take much longer. So, okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking us why our fourth quarter results didn't meet standards and didn't meet what we thought they were. Is that the question that you're asking me? Well, yeah, I'm asking you about the fourth quarter, but also wondering as you look out into the future, what do you see? But really it's about but again, while that person's speaking, you're cranking away. What's an answer? What's an answer? What's an answer? That's one great way of doing it. Another great way is always have a prop if you can. You can do this if you're sitting down. You can do this if you're on stage. What is one thing a speaker can always have with them on stage? It's a bottle of water. Someone asks you a challenging question. A great way is to just, oh, that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked me about that. Yeah, I was thinking about that actually earlier today, and I was expecting that question, so I'm really happy that you asked it. Now, you can start to put these things together. What you can do is you can take the drink of water. Is that really what I need? I need more time. Take the drink of water and then say, great question. I'm glad you asked that. I was thinking about that. But if I understand you correctly, is this what I want to make sure I answer your question appropriately. Is this what you're asking me? And again, they will give you more time. Now, what happens if you actually have to answer the question and it's really challenging? Obviously, that's what PR and media relations are all about. However, one thing you can do, and unfortunately, I hate to use this person as an example, but Kellyanne Conway, who was Donald Trump's press secretary for a while, or not even press secretary, was really good at deflecting questions. Now, I'm not suggesting you do what she did because I think that's a little extreme, but I call it pivoting. You bring in the question that's asked from you. Why are your fourth quarter results not what you want them to be? And you pivot to the area you want to be. So let me answer that question. Derek, I'm glad you asked that question about fourth quarter. Yeah, it was a little challenging for us as well. I think we were surprised with those results, but I can tell you what we're doing in response to that is that we're bringing on more sales staff. The product development cycle is definitely moving much faster than it has in the past. We've commissioned some market research to understand, is the dynamic changing in the market, and is it something that we should be doing? The key for us is to make sure that the fourth quarter is behind us. We always look ahead. First quarter, Q1 of 2022 is looking really strong for us. I understand from the sales team, we have some strong orders in the pipeline, so we're really excited about that. I left the question way far back. For most people, they're not going to come back. Now, if it's a journalist, yeah, they might come back to you. If you're on an investor call, they might come back to you, but try that first. All else fails, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, that's a great question. We're looking into that. We will come back to you when we have a firm answer on that. Again, you're going to have to know your audience and if that's possible. Okay, so real quick, and I have a few questions I'll round out and then we'll get everyone back to their day. So some key takeaways. Going back to the beginning, remember, planning is greater than executing. I do believe that in life. If you plan really well and if you're ready to adapt when you actually start doing things, the planning is more important than the execution. Think about what you want to say, write it down first, bring it together on paper in the order in which you want to present it, then move into your platform of choice for presenting it, but planning is greater than executing. Always tell a story. Doesn't matter the presentation, doesn't matter the topic. There should always be a story. Sometimes the story isn't evident at the beginning. Sometimes the story happens after you write it. In other words, you put everything down and then you see that theme. That's okay. But it's nice to have a beginning, a middle, and end, a little bit of tension if you can. That way, when you present the result or the solution, it looks that much better. Remember, PowerPoint is a crutch. You should use it as your friend. Don't put thousands of words on there. I know you know this, so I'm not going to make it a big point, but PowerPoint is a crutch. Definitely keep that in mind. Channel your energy. Remember, we talked about recording yourself, slowing down, having that little moment, going to the bathroom, jumping up and down, whatever it is, easing into the presentation so people understand who you are and what your style is. All of these things can help you channel your energy and have a more impactful and effective presentation. And the last thing that oftentimes gets omitted is to have fun. Of course, some presentations aren't fun. Some presentations are about delivering bad news. Those aren't fun. I know that. But when you're given the opportunity to speak, that's a fantastic way to help elevate your career and for people to see you and to see the thinking that you have. So try to look at them as an opportunity. Even if it's bad news, you just find the best way you can to share bad news. That's the only thing I can say there. So there's my email address. That's me on LinkedIn. You are more than welcome to find me there and to reach out with any questions. I have a lot more than this. We're already over time. We have stuff on technical presentations and things of that nature and how to share that. That's a common question that comes up. So maybe there's something we can send in the follow-up to people as well. I'm going to stop sharing real quick, Lida. I have a few questions to clean up here in the Q&A, and then I will hand it back over to you. Let's see what we have in here. Yeah, so anonymous attendee says, while speaking, if I speak slowly, I find that I lose my train of thought. I find I am more confident while speaking rather quickly. Any advice on how to improve? Boring answer is practice, if you can. But I would ask, I think the bigger thing is to ask yourself the question, why do you lose your train of thought? Is it because you start to wander? The problem is when you speak quickly, especially depending on who your audience is, you run the risk of losing them if you go too quickly. And I fall prey to that myself sometimes. I might have done it tonight, especially if I get really excited about a particular segment. So I think that ask yourself the question, maybe spend some time thinking about why you lose your train of thought. Is it that it allows your brain to stop processing for a minute, and then things from the day start coming in like, oh, I have that email I have to respond to, or, oh, that project's due next week, or what am I having for dinner? Those kind of things can creep in. So I think the practicing part so that you're familiar with the material can help, and just practice. I know it's boring, but it's the truth. How to organize your thoughts better prior to speaking up or answering the question. Yeah. Oftentimes I find that when people make comments or when people build presentations, and again, this is one of those do as I say, not as I do moments, because this presentation had a lot of stuff, right? Only one or two things are really going to truly impact something. Like when you think about when you buy something, you usually buy it for one or two reasons. And then the other stuff is like, yeah, that's cool. But for me, like that's the reason why I bought that thing, or that's the reason why I decided to do something. So I think the first thing is to think of all of the things that you have, even when you're thinking in a situation where you want to ask a question to a colleague, really ask yourself what's truly important. What am I really trying to get out of this question? And what do I really want? Those are the things I think can help start to organize what's important. If you are presenting, you also want to think about what's important for your audience. I think that's ultimately should be your guiding light. What is important for the audience to either take this decision, give me money by a sale, be inspired to do the thing that I want them to do because I'm a team leader. All of those things I think can help. Last question, Lida, and I'll hand it back over to you. And it says, do you use any tricks to ensure that you keep your presentation within time limits? Yes, today's not a good example because I went 8 minutes over, which I'm usually a huge stickler on time. I do keep timers up. That's one thing. Practice it. Again, oftentimes you put it on paper and you're like, oh, I've got plenty of time to do this. Run through it. Oftentimes you'll be like, oh boy, this is really long. I've been in some presentations when I've done this one and it's gone quick. I've done it before where it's taken a little longer because it's an organic thing. If you know where you should be at certain points in time because you've practiced it, you can say to yourself, oh, normally by 7:30 but normally by 6:30, I'm at halfway through the presentation. I'm only at 20%. I need to speed up, or the other way around. But again, I know it's boring, but practice, because it will, no matter how short you make it, we have a tendency to expand our thoughts and to talk a lot. We're not very effective with verbal communication. So I challenge you to always practice it as best you can so that you can see how long it is. And then ultimately at the end of the day, you might have to skip some stuff. And if you do, then you need to ask yourself, was it really necessary that I even included it? Some things to think about. Normally, and Lida knows this because she's been with me on a lot of presentations, normally I'm pretty spot on, but to be fair, I did add a couple slides and that's what made it happen. So anyway, I'm Brandon Kirby. I'm the Director of Marketing, Sales, and Admissions here at RSM. It's been my pleasure to speak with you or speak at you for the past hour and 10 minutes. Hopefully I didn't bore you to death. Thank you so much for your attention and for your participation. And Lida, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It actually took me a while to turn on my camera because I was keeping notes myself. You shared so many things that, it's really useful for us doing presentations, and especially the practice part. Sometimes the story sounds good in your mind, but when you actually say it out loud, it doesn't make sense. So this wasn't the case for you today, but thanks for sharing that tip too. So it's great, everyone, to have had you with us today. We will send you a follow-up email with a recording of the event and some additional information. And we look forward to seeing you in our future events. As you've seen on the RSM website, we have many nice things coming up for you in the next few weeks and months. So we look forward to seeing you there. Have a great evening and speak to you again soon.
Yes, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you soon. Good night.